We're glad to have you back. Before we get talking, let's tell you that to ensure a smooth recapitalization process in the banking industry, the Securities and Exchange Commission is to issue guidelines to facilitate the capital raising process of banks in the country. The outgoing Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Mr. Lamido Yuguda, stated this at a virtual press briefing on the 2024 first quarter Capital Market Committee meeting. He says SEC is partnering with the Central Bank of Nigeria and other relevant agencies to approve 5 infrastructure fund shelf programs totaling 1.5 trillion naira, which is in alignment with the federal government infrastructure development goals. He said the commission equally actively supported the growth of the funds management industry in 2023, with approvals for our new mutual funds of 18.2 billion naira and discretionary and non-discretionary investment products of 17.6 billion naira. An International Monetary Fund, IMF Spring Meetings 2024 has come and gone, but the concerns around critical issues raised still linger. The meeting, which brought together financial leaders and policymakers from around the world to discuss pressing global economic issues, provided a platform for Nigerian policymakers to engage with international experts and explore potential solutions to their pressing issues as they affect Nigeria. What are some of the key takeaways for Nigeria? Let's get talking. I introduced him earlier. He's live for us from Ikoyi, Lagos, Director, Research and Strategy with Chapel Hill, Denham, Mr. Tajuddin Ibrahim. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining the program.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me on the show today.
Yes, a lot of talks around the IMF World Bank meetings, but something that seems to be generic is issues around debt, issues around climate change, issues around fiscal responsibility, of course, how to manage the situation, the fallout of the crisis in some countries around the world. What to you is the take-home for Africa's most populous nation? We are not doing very well when it comes to the rebasing now. You saw the figures just released. We are number 4 at the moment. Take it, Mr. Taj. What do you make of this?
So absolutely, you're spot on. But if we take it one after the other and we consider the debt sustainability, for instance, I personally think that that is one. There is a major key takeaway for us there, in the sense that we currently are seeing our debt level sort of rising, and it is rising partly because we are taking on more debt, and partly because of the devaluation of our currency, and that of course has made our debt to GDP ratio, for instance, to be above the 40% self-imposed benchmark for the country. But if we strip out the impact of currency devaluation, our debt to GDP ratio, for instance, is around 33%. And one key message around that is that there is need for us as a country to ensure the stability of our currency. In this regard, I recognize the effort of the CBN in ensuring that we have a stable currency, as we have seen within the past few weeks. What matters to my mind going forward is the sustainability of that level. The second element for me, which is a major key takeaway, is still around the debt level. Naturally speaking, debt is not a bad thing. What is very important to focus on is around the utilization of such debt. When you accumulate debt and you are investing for the future, and what you are investing on over the lifetime of the asset, and we look at the cash flow. If the cash flow can pay for the debt you are taking, then one would not regard that as a bad debt at all. So in that context, Nigeria needs to look at how our debt is utilized. I mean, the proceeds of the debt that we get. Another thing that I think is a key major takeaway is around the climate change. Climate change, is a key element of concern around the world, and it is one area where Nigeria, will also need to work on around decarbonization, which is, very important and that, can ensure a sustainable growth, for the country over the medium to long term. And you mentioned very briefly that we are now like the fourth largest economy in Africa. That is not surprising to me. I believe it largely is a reflection of our exchange rate, and it further sort of highlights the reason we need to ensure the stability of our currency from the current level, and possibly over time we ensure that the currency appreciates above, appreciate against the US dollars, for instance.
Mr. Taj, you touched on my second question, and it's so interesting that you did that. Now, Naira continues to appreciate one way or the other. We've seen series of arguments around this, people making different positions around why it is appreciated. But to me, I would ask you, how sustainable is this? It's on the one side. And on the other side, you are the economist and the professional here. Is our currency appropriately priced at the moment?
So if we look at the currency and, we touch on the appreciation that we have seen for the currency in the past, in 2 to 3 weeks, I recognize that, number one, the CBN has done a lot of background work, starting with, policies, starting with reforms in the banking sector to start with. The net open position of banks, which are now required, to be zero. The second element is bringing back the BDCs to the, official foreign exchange markets. Another key element, around ensuring that there is a lot of transparency, in the market in terms of pricing. And another element, for consideration that I know has also underpinned the appreciation of the currency is supply to the, BDC operators. So if we bring all this together, I think they largely speaking explain, the reason that we have seen, the appreciation of the currency. That is on the front of the CBN's actions. Let's take a look at monetary policy decisions. We have seen a much tighter monetary policy stance by the CBN with, around 600 basis points increase in the policy rate year to date, with also an increase in the, CRR, to 45% currently as we speak. All these elements are pointing to a much tighter monetary policy stance by the CBN, and that has, largely speaking, helped yield on fixed income instruments to be elevated. And accordingly, it has attracted foreign investors into the Nigerian market, and they have, brought in new money. New money brought into the market looks like around $3 billion on a year-to-date basis. So that, largely speaking, is what is, supporting the performance of the Naira against the US dollars. Asking about its sustainability, I think sustainability is a function of a lot of factors. Number one, from an export, standpoint, we need to sustain our export. We need to improve on the value of exports and slow down as much as possible on our imports. That can ensure that we have, a better balance of trade, in that regard, that can underpin the FX reserves and also underpin the ability of the CBN to defend, the currency or to be able to supply to the market. The second element to my mind is what I consider a much lower hanging fruit. A much lower hanging fruit because it is, borrowings, and we have heard about, a couple of borrowing channels that the fiscal authorities looking to consider. And once those channels are tapped, we are going to see inflows that will also underpin our foreign currency reserves. I think, to my mind, through the end of this year, the outlook for the Naira is positive. The final question is around the fair value of the Naira. At Chapel Hill Denham, we estimate that the fair value of the Naira to a dollar is around 900 level.
That sounds good. Sounds really good. Let's go to another topical issue, which I know, of course, the IMF and World Bank has been telling Nigeria, drop subsidies. Now we've taken out subsidies on PMS. We've taken out subsidies partly on electricity tariff, which is biting hard. Mr. Tajina, I like your reactions to all of this. But many are saying that if finally Dangote Refinery, Port Harcourt Refinery, even there's a statement to that today that's saying fuel could sell as low as 500 naira. Some are also saying on another side that it seems subsidy is crippling back. A lot of questions around this. How does all of this come to you and what do you make of it?
I think the reality that I believe Nigerians have to bear in mind is that we have some elements of subsidy that is, back into the system. Because if there were no elements of, subsidy by now, we should be talking about, buying, fuel at around, 1,000 or thereabout, given where, global crude oil prices are, and also given the outlook for global crude oil prices, it is likely that, the, per liter price of fuel goes to like, 1,500, 1,700 levels. But if we bear in mind the activities of Dangote Refinery, I think the activity of the refinery is a lot more compelling than some of us are thinking about it. From an economic growth standpoint, it is compelling. Bear in mind that this business was not operational last year. So now we have it this year being operational. It is going to be an additional growth engine to the Nigerian economy. The other refineries that are owned by the government are also going to come back to operation to underpin the overall economic activity of the country. From a GDP standpoint, it is a lot enormous in terms of impact, in my view. The second thing around it is around the prices of fuel, which I believe is going to be positively impacted. One key element is that the Nigerian government is considering selling crude oil at naira instead of selling in dollars. So they want to sell in naira. So what that implies is that the element of currency volatility, that risk is completely eliminated at the beginning of value creation for end users. So we should be expecting, petroleum product prices to moderate, to come down, over the next, couple of months, and that's, to my mind, will positively impact the consumer price index, which is used to measure the level of inflation. So the outlook for inflation in terms of the operation of Dangote Refinery and the operation of the local, state-owned refinery, those elements are positive for inflation outlook. And I think it will just be a matter of months when we begin to see, all those positive elements in terms of impact to the Nigerian public.
Well, this discussion would definitely not be complete if we don't touch on inflation. 33.2% is where we are at the moment. And there's a projection that it might get higher before we start to see it taper down. Now, for me, mine will be with electricity tariff for Band A consumers hitting about a 300% increase. And we just talked about fuel prices, which we still expect to start to decline. When do you think that we'll start to see inflation go down? The CBN says we are going to focus on inflation targeting. How does this correlate?
So looking at inflation, I think there is one element that we should not miss out. That is around imported food inflation that we saw moderated in the month of March. Taking a look at that index that moderated in the month of March, it had a positive impact on, food inflation, on a monthly basis. If we look at inflation month on month inflation moderated in the month of, March. We recognize that, food inflation, for instance, has, gone above, 4% on a monthly basis, but we have started to see, moderation largely because, of the moderation in, in imported food inflation. So what is playing out there is the result of the stability of the exchange rate, which is the work of the CBN in this regard. So my sense is that in as much as we continue to have stable FX, or even a better scenario where the Naira continues to gain against the US dollars, imported food inflation is most likely going to go down. And if that goes down, food inflation on a month-on-month basis most likely will go down. If that materializes and it is sustained over the next couple of months, there are high chances that we will see year-on-year inflation moderate below 33%. But as we speak, at Chapel Hill Denham, our forecast is that inflation will hit around 34% before we begin to see a moderation from July, which will be reported in the month of August. But the way it will moderate is exactly the way I've described it. We see moderation in imported food inflation, we see moderation in food inflation, and then we see most likely moderation in year-on-year food inflation, and that will impact positively on inflation headline on a year-on-year basis from July, August, in my view.
Well, a lot of expectations are really moving forward. Purchasing power of Nigerians continue to decline. Many will tell you that we're paying higher bills. We are yet to get increase in our pay, or maybe salaries and all, and wages. Now, my question will be, many expect that government should see to what minimum wage and all of that very soon. What impact do you think? Some say when this happens, inflation might go the other way. So how do we check and balance this? Because purchasing power remains low at this time, Mr. Tachi.
So it remains low. I agree with you absolutely, but I think there'll be a time lag, right? In terms of the current inflation level that we have, and how minimum wage increase will play a catch up and drive inflation in the nearest future. So as we speak, we have started to see some price moderation of food prices. For instance, let me give you an instance. A bag of rice, for instance, has moderated to around 75, 77 from around well over 80,000 naira per bag. And I think it is largely reflective of the impact of stability in the currency. So when we have that kind of stability, and consumers' pocket should be a lot should have some should be able to buy some goods at a much lower prices compared to where they were before. But in terms of wage increases, Nigerians, largely speaking, need wage increases in the short term. But that cannot completely solve our current challenges. What I believe is sustainable is ensuring that the cost of doing business comes down significantly. When the cost of doing business comes down significantly, what it means is that the prices of products and services will be relatively stable. There will be no abnormal increases in prices. If that is the case, then whatever wage we earn as Nigerians, we will be able to afford goods and services, and there'll be less of an impact of demand pulled inflation. I think that would be to a medium to long term outlook. But in the short term, no doubt, when you see a wage increase, you most likely are going to see inflation being negatively impacted in the short term.
Finally, Mr. Taj, this question comes up again and again. Do we have that handshake between the fiscal and the monetary side? There are some funds that are supposed to have been released. That was also in the news today for small businesses and all of that, hanging within the financial institutions. And CBN might, according to the report, might be asking for all of these funds. Why are we not getting these funds to those that really need them? We hear of large funds and banks, but business owners are always difficult to access it. Can we wrap up on that note?
Yes, we can. But I think, broadly speaking, I think there is some level of handshake, between the monetary authority and the fiscal authority. And I can say comfortably that, this is one of the periods, that we have seen, such a handshake. But in terms of, for some form of disbursement, I think, one could look at the area of, bureaucracy. It could be that the process and the procedures put in place are not that business friendly as they should. Those could be some of the areas that they will be looking at. And I think also in a contractionary monetary environment, you don't really want to roll out so much in terms of access to loans. Bear in mind that the CBN last week cut the loan to deposit ratio of banks to 50% from 65% at the minimum level. So what that means is it is a contractionary monetary policy stance. So I think that there could be caution around that on the part of the CBN in trying to ensure that they do not give too much to the economy in an environment where they are trying to control inflation. It could be that, in my view.
Well, it's a good way to live it. Director, Research and Strategy, Chapel Hill, Denham. Mr. Tajuddin Ibrahim, it's always nice having you on the show. Do enjoy your week.